YouTube world. So some of you may have heard that coral bleaching has been in the news again, and in fact last week Monday the Australian Research Council announced that the Great Barrier Reef is experiencing its second major coral bleaching event in the space of 2 years. And I've had one or two people ask me about this, so I thought for today's video we tackle the questions surrounding coral bleaching. What is coral bleaching? Why has it been in the news so much? Why it's important? Why we should care? And so forth. So first up, we need to define what a coral is, because they are quite complex structures, but they are super cool. They are part rock, part animal, and part plant. So the coral will lay down a limestone skeleton, which is the rocky part, and inside of this limestone skeleton will live tiny jellyfish-like animals called polyps. And then inside of these polyps will live a type of algae called zooxanthellae. Now these zooxanthellae are the key because they photosynthesize and provide the coral with the food it needs to survive. So they are kind of like the chefs of the place. But not only that, they provide the corals with their bright colors actually. So corals form what we call a symbiotic relationship because you have two organisms that live together, the polyps and the zooxanthellae, and they both benefit from each other. Now the trouble comes in when ocean temperatures get too warm, because if temperatures rise too much, the corals get stressed out and they expel their zooxanthellae, kick them out of house and home, and effectively starve themselves because they are losing their food source. In addition, without their zooxanthellae, they lose all their color and they become white, hence the term coral bleaching. Now bleaching does not necessarily mean that the corals are dead yet, but if water temperatures stay hot and there are prolonged periods of bleaching, it can eventually lead to the death of the coral. However, if the water temperatures cool off, the corals will return to their normal state. They will apologize to the zooxanthellae for their short emotional breakdown, the zooxanthellae will recolonize the coral, and the coral can rejuvenate. There have been three major global coral bleaching events on record. The first was in 1998, where 16% of corals worldwide were bleached. The second was in 2010, and the third was last year in 2016. Now for the Great Barrier Reef specifically, there have been four major coral bleaching events. Again, the first was in 1998, but then the second was in 2002, last year in 2016, and this year the most recently recorded one in 2017. However, last year's coral bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef was unlike anything scientists had seen before, and the extent and severity of it were unprecedented. Now, marine scientists in Australia were actually expecting this bleaching event to occur because they could see the ocean temperatures rising and reaching that critical level where bleaching starts to occur. So they did a great job of performing surveys to record this bleaching event, and their aerial surveys revealed that in the top 1,000 kilometer stretch of the Great Barrier Reef, 95% of corals were bleached. And while last year's bleaching event affected this northern stretch, this year's bleaching event is mostly affecting the middle stretch of the Great Barrier Reef, which effectively means that 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef are currently suffering from coral bleaching. And this is serious cause for concern because without any gap between last year's bleaching event and this year's bleaching event, there is zero opportunity for these corals to recover, and scientists are predicting huge mortality rates for the Great Barrier Reef. Now, a prominent coral reef scientist from Australia, Professor Hugh, had this to say about last year's bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef.
For me personally, it was devastating to look out of the chopper window and see reef after reef destroyed by bleaching. But really my emotion is not so much sadness as anger. I'm really angry that the government isn't listening to the evidence that we're providing them since 1998. It's too early yet to tell precisely how many of the bleached corals will die, but judging from the extreme level of bleaching, even the most robust corals are snow white. I'd expect to see about half of those corals die in the coming month or so. We're already seeing mortality beginning in our underwater surveys near Cairns and Port Douglas. On the bright side, it's more likely that these pristine reefs in the northern section will be better able to bounce back afterwards. Nonetheless, we're looking at a 10-year recovery period. So this is a very severe blow to the most pristine part of the Great Barrier Reef. It's hardly good news.
Now, the saddest part is that these coral bleaching events are unequivocally related to climate change. So while last year's bleaching event was blamed on El Nino, which is a climate phenomenon that causes certain parts of the oceans to warm, this year's bleaching event is happening in a non-El Nino year, so temperatures really should not be that warm, and this is serious cause for concern. But everybody knows the story of global warming and climate change, increased carbon emissions, the whole world is getting warmer, the oceans are getting warmer, which means more stressed out corals and more frequent bleaching events. And there is even proof that this is related to climate change because scientists have examined coral cores that are 400 years old, and they have found 0 signs of bleaching prior to the 1998 global bleaching event that was recorded. So coral bleaching is really all due to human activity, and we are killing our coral reef systems. So why should we care? Well, if you consider that coral reefs support about 25% of marine life, they form the base of the food chain, and without the base, the rest of the food chain collapses. They provide support to about 500 million people worldwide through job creation and as a food source, and they provide an estimated $30 billion a year through revenue. Well, then we probably should care. And how can we help? Well, we all need to try and take responsibility for our own personal carbon footprint, and we need to try and reduce our effect that we have on the planet as much as possible. And I'm not going to go into details about this because that's a whole separate video, but you can Google ways to reduce your carbon footprint, because really it's not too late to start to try and save our planet, reduce carbon emissions, slow down the process of climate change. So I hope you've all learned something today. If you enjoy these kinds of videos where I chat more about the sciencey side of things, please let me know down in the comments below. Give my video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments and I will address them. You know what to do. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter to keep up to date with me. And let's spread the word out there. Let people know what is happening to our coral reef systems so we can all start to care a bit more and try to reduce our carbon emissions.